Everyone, in this video I'll be explaining one of my decks to you and hopefully you'll be inspired to try something similar. Now, this deck is the first where I did not give it a trial run on Octagon before bringing it to my local game store. I just sleeved it up and headed down and tried to make it work. And surprisingly, it went. I played 2 games with it and I won 1 game, lost 1 game. So that was a very shocking outcome. I expected to be thoroughly pummeled into the ground by my opponents, and if you look at my deck composition, I think you can easily see why. This is a blank deck. All the cards are white in color, so yeah, this is absolutely crazy. By playing all white cards, you're giving up a lot of power in this game. So, firstly, I want to make a comment on some of the cards that are recently released ever since Honor and Profit that have made this a possibility. Previously, pre-Honor and Profit, you could do the same thing, but it's just too difficult to make it work because you are limited to using very porous ice that is rendered useless very easily after a few turns, the likes of Wall of Static, Bastion, Enigma. These are terrible ice. But ever since Honor and Profit, we have gotten some very powerful cards that actually make this deck somewhat respectable. So let's go through these cards one by one. Firstly, pre-Honor and Profit, 2 very important cards came out in double time. The first is Quandary. Quandary allows you to end the run cheaply for 1 credit, and as you can see, economy isn't very good in this deck, so having a quick end the run to stop any early agenda steals is very important. The other one is NAPD Contract. It's the best agenda in this deck, honestly. It's an auto-include 3 off in any white deck, pretty much, because it's so hard to steal. It makes such a good target to rush out early game. It's one of the easiest agendas to score, simply because, and also one of the easiest agendas to bait the runner into running futilely on. Alright, so that's that. Then we have Honor and Profit, which brought us Rainbow, the first piece of decently taxing ice against the runner. It is porous in that all the runner needs is 1 breaker to get through it, but for 3 res costs, it's a 4 strength ice, and that's great, especially considering that I cannot use Eli, Ichi, your favorite 4 strength ice in this deck. Having a Rainbow around is a tremendous help. Then we move on to the Lunar Cycle, where we have some very interesting cards. Firstly, with currents from Lunar Cycle, we have Lag Time. Lag Time isn't the most amazing card. You will most likely lose agendas very quickly with this deck if the runner is of any decent caliber. So currents would be quite useless. But in 1 game, I actually managed to assemble I managed to find all three rainbows very early, so I had 1 guarding each server, and then I played out my lag time. So in order for the runner to even consider stealing agenda, he has to get past a 5 strength ice. How annoying is that out of a neutral deck? That is amazing. Alright, so besides lag time, we have the first and the only so far neutral upgrade for the Corp, Will of the Wisp. Will of the Wisp actually gives fangs to this deck. Without Will of the Wisp, I don't have much in the way of controlling the runner. With Will of the Wisp, I'm able to trash their breakers, which synergizes very well with my Ice Suite, which is mostly end the run binary ice. So if I'm able to trash the bury the Corroders, the Yorks, the Guardian Blades, I prolong the game, hopefully giving myself more time to amass money and score agendas. This will create valuable scoring windows for me, and most runners generally don't see this coming. Alright, what else has Lunar Cycle brought? It has brought a couple new 5/3 agendas. There's Hate's Fragment and Eden Fragment, both of which are superior to the other 5/3s we have currently, which is Priority Requisition, useless in this deck because all the ice are cheap, and Executive Retreat, which is also pretty mediocre. Executive Retreat is decent because it allows you to evade agenda flat, which this deck would inevitably run into. There are no Jackson Howards available, so the next best thing is reshuffling my entire deck, hand into my deck, and drawing 5 new cards at will. So, yep. And the most probably the most important thing that inspired me to make this deck are the Grail Eyes from Lunar Cycle. These are incredibly powerful eyes, and they definitely warrant the 1 influence cost per ice. But since this is a white deck, it's completely fine to include them. Lancelot and Galahad are both crazy good. They basically force the runner to bring out their barriers and code gate breakers, otherwise they risk having their programs trashed. Being the only program trashers in this deck, aside from Will of the Wisp, which doesn't even properly trash programs, I think it's very crucial that these cards exist. Once the runner knows you are running Grail Eyes, they are forced to gather all 3 breaker types, which means that you actually have quite a large window to start scoring agendas, some valuable agendas within, one of which is Gila Hands. In both of the games I played at my local game store, Gila Hands was the one key card that allowed me to do very well, because it gave me economy I needed for the rest of the game. I was really good to go from that point on, because Melange is pretty hard to defend as the Corp, and Pet Campaign will get trashed sooner or later. Without that, you're just left with Hedge Funds and Restructure, which is pretty weak. So having the 3 credits per turn, that's very crucial, and I managed to score an early Gila Hands in both of my games. One of the most important agendas in my deck. So, this deck is pretty crappy, I'm not gonna lie. Any good runner should be able to beat this deck, but it can only get stronger from here on out, because in the upcoming 2 data packs, All That Remains and the Source of the Lunar Cycle, there are even more neutral cards that boost the power of this deck. Firstly, we have Merlin, which rounds off the Grail Eye suite. Merlin adds so many more fangs to this deck, as if the 2 Grail Eyes, Lancelot and Galahad, isn't enough. Now, yes, the runner has to bring out their Code Gate Breaker in addition to their Barrier and Sentry Breakers, and if they're not careful, they'll get flatlined pretty badly. So this will hopefully buy you enough more space for you to score your agendas. The other upcoming card which I'm excited about that can work very well in this deck is oh yes, Utopia Fragment, of course, the last of the 3 Fragment agendas, and the best of them all. For those of you who are unaware, Utopia Fragment reads, in order for a runner to steal an agenda, they need to pay 2 credits per advancement token on that agenda as an additional cost. So basically, a double advance agenda lying in a remote costs just as much to steal as an NAPD contract. And if it's an NAPD that is doubly advanced, they'll have to pay 8 credits just to steal it, which is pretty ridiculous. So yeah, it's a very strong agenda. Of course, the only downside is you need to score it as a 5-3. Not easy at all. Alright, so yes, this is basically my neutral deck in a nutshell. As you can see, because this is so reliant on early game ice, your job of running this deck is to quickly score as many agendas as you can. Because once you get to the mid game, it's pretty hard to continue scoring agendas in your remote when the runner can threaten things like test run, inside job, and so on and so forth. One of the most powerful tools in this deck, and very underrated in most other decks, is Cyberdeck's Trial. It has been incredibly valuable in both my games and the local game store. In one game, I was able to create a scoring window by purging viruses from data suckers against an Atman sucker deck. In another game, it actually allowed me to score my agendas because the opponent was running a Shikana. So Cyberdecks allowed me to unload the Shikana and score 5-3s within 2 turns. So that was good. Yeah, Chimera is also very valuable. Against any deck that doesn't pack AI breakers, Chimera is the go-to ice for stopping remote runs completely. It will buy me a lot of time to get a melange going, to score 5-3 agendas, etc., which are all very valuable in this deck. Because you probably more or less, it's almost impossible to score a 5-3 agenda as a last agenda. You have to rush them out early. As for ID choice, I personally stick by this rule. You can pick any ID you want, but it must not make an impact on the game. It basically means it must be a blank ID. So you cannot use HB Engineering in the future. You cannot use Jinteki RP to make it more difficult to run remotes. So from interestingly enough, there's one ID from each faction that fits in this category. For HB, there are two. Custom Biotics, which is the hardest to play with, because once you use the Custom Biotics ID, I keep in mind that when I play this at my local game store, my opponents had no idea I was running a completely white deck. Of course, you can't tell them that you're running a white deck, otherwise it's way too easy to play around. It must be a secret. Let them figure it out by themselves. Let's see how long it takes them to discover that you are playing a completely white deck. Custom Biotics is the hardest because it basically invalidates an entire quarter of the current card pool as a possibility. There are no Jinteki cards in your deck, so they don't have to worry about that at all. The other HP identity that you can use is Stronger Together, because there are no Bioroids in this deck. Yeah, it's a pretty weird thing to do. Playing Stronger Together without any Bioroids, I think they'll catch on pretty quickly. From Jinteki, there's Nisei Division. Because there are no side cards, you will never trigger your ID ability. Nisei is probably the second best ID to use because it is pretty hard to it's pretty hard to run when the runner keeps thinking that there might be Komainus or Surugis that are lying around in your deck. There might be snares, so they cannot run last click, etc. So Nisei Division is pretty scary. On the Wayland side, obviously there's the crappy ID, because we built it. Because there are no advanceable eyes in this deck, the one recurring credit of because we built it will never trigger. It's a pretty crappy ID, not much else to say. Then from NBN, we have Making News. The core set ID. Because there are no traces in this deck at all, I'm not running Dracos or Hunters because I have no decent means of tag punishment in the neutral cards. Freelancer is horrible, at times it's expensive, so tags are a no-go, and that's fine. So that allows me to use NBA Making News. That was the ID I played with in both of my games, and in both games the runner was very, very psyched out by the very fact that I was playing the NBN ID. They were always worried about Astro scripts. Every time I install a face down remote, they've got to check it because it could be an Astro script. They were worried that my upgrades, which are just Harmless Will of the Wisp, were Bernie's Mice, which means that they couldn't run on the last click, and so on and so forth. So all these mind games, just from picking an ID like NBN Making News, scares the runners so much into making very conservative plays. And that was a huge part of me winning the games, because they didn't know that my deck is completely white. They were preparing for the worst, and as a result, they weren't playing as aggressively as they could or should have. So it's a very interesting deck to try out. NBN Making News is definitely the best blank ID to use for this deck. And for one last remark, there is a reason why I'm not running arguably the strongest neutral ice in the game. That is Grim. Grim is incredibly powerful. It's the only 5 strength neutral ice that you have, and the surprise treasure program can set the runner very far back. The biggest problem with Grim, I'm sure you all know, is the 1 bad pub, which makes it very difficult to score any PD contract and works against you very quickly, allowing the runner to set up much faster than ever before and penetrate your servers that much easier. So Grim, unfortunately, cannot make the cut in this sort of deck. Anyway, Lancelot does a good enough job with the rest of the Grill Ice in trashing programs, so it's fine. So that's my deck. I encourage you, if you want a challenge at your local game store next time, to try out this deck and give it a shot. And basically, infuriate your opponents, especially if you end up winning, on how this was such a harmless deck, but they played so hard, overthinking the game when you are running such innocuous cards. I had much fun at my local game store and cracked everyone up with this deck, and I hope you can do the same. It's very fun. It's definitely worth a shot, especially once you get your grubby hands on Merlin. Ooh. Alright, thanks for watching. Goodbye.